Okay, let's dive deep. You've handed us quite a stack of sources here.
Yep. An overview, study materials, looks like history, theology, some key terms.
All focused on the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church.
That's the one. And our mission for this deep dive, and we're sticking only to these documents, remember, is to unpack the essential history, identity, and core beliefs.
Of what the sources call one of the world's oldest Christian churches.
Exactly. We're aiming to pull out the key insights from this material just so you get a clear picture without, getting lost in every single detail.
Right. And these sources, they really lay out a compelling story. I mean, roots stretching back nearly 2,000 years.
Incredible, isn't it? And unique characteristics, pivotal moments. It definitely stands out.
So based on these documents, where is the best place to start trying to understand this church?
Well, the materials immediately establish its foundational identity. They really emphasize it's one of the oldest Christian churches on the planet.
Just the age itself is striking. And it's identified within a specific group, a particular family of churches.
Yes, it's categorized as an Oriental Orthodox Church, and understanding that label is actually pretty key
Why is that?
because the sources link it directly to a really major turning point in Christian history.
Ah, okay. You mean the Council of Chalcedon, 451 CE?
That's the one. The documents flag this as a pivotal event.
And what happened there, according to these materials? What was the outcome?
The sources explain that this council led to a really significant separation, a break from other Christian bodies.
Over theology.
Yes, the core disagreement was about understanding Christ's nature, what theologians call Christology.
Right.
So the churches that didn't accept the definition hammered out at Chalcedon, they formed this group, the Oriental Orthodox churches.
Okay, so the Oriental Orthodox family, including the Ethiopian Church, represents those traditions that went a different way after Chalcedon, specifically because of this theological point.
Exactly. And the sources list the others in this group too, don't they?
Yeah, let's see, Coptic, Armenian, Syriac, Eritrean, and the Malankar Orthodox Syrian Church.
Right. And this divergence brings us straight to the heart of the Ethiopian Church's distinct theological identity, as it's explained in your materials,
Which centers on?
what they call the Miaphysite understanding of Christ.
Miaphysite, okay, that sounds technical. How do the sources define it?
They define Miaphysite as believing in a single, unified nature of Christ.
Single nature, okay.
And they stress that this single nature comes from the perfect union of the divine and the human. Importantly, this union happens without any confusion, change, division, or separation.
So it's not saying there are two distinct natures sort of existing alongside each other in Christ, which is more the Chalcedonian view.
Correct. The Miaphysite view, as presented here, is one unified nature that fully embodies both divinity and humanity, perfectly united.
Got it.
And this theological stance, it's so central that it's actually reflected right there in the church's name.
Tewahedo, how does that connect according to the sources? What does Tewahedo mean?
The materials explain it's an Amharic and Gaze word. It means being made one or united.
Ah, so it directly points to this Miaphysite Christology.
Exactly. The divine and human natures made one in Christ. The name itself is basically a statement of their core theology.
Wow, that's powerful. Embedding the core belief right into the identity like that. Okay, so we have the ancient roots, the Oriental Orthodox family connections stemming from that post-Chalcedon split, and this defining Miaphysite theology summed up in Tewahedo. Now, what about its specific history in Ethiopia? Where do the sources take us next?
Well, the documents trace Christianity's presence in Ethiopia back incredibly early, really far back.
Oh, early.
They mention a traditional account that puts its arrival in the 1st century CE.
First century.
Yeah, supposedly via a eunuch baptized by the Apostle Philip.
Yeah.
They even reference the passage in Acts 8.
A direct link to the apostolic age, at least in tradition. That's quite a claim about their origins. But the formal establishment, that comes later.
It does, yes. The sources note the formal establishment happened in the 4th century CE.
During which period?
During the time of the Aksumite kingdom, which was a major power then.
And was there a key figure involved in making it official?
Yes, King Ezana of Aksum. The materials state clearly for it all. He converted, and then he made Christianity the official religion of his kingdom.
That must have been a monumental decision.
Absolutely. It fundamentally intertwined the church's history with Ethiopia's history from that point on. You can't really separate them, according to these sources.
That early state adoption must have really shaped its role over the centuries. The sources also mention a long-standing connection with another big ancient church, right?
They do, yeah. They detail the close historical ties with the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria in Egypt.
And close were those ties.
Well, for a very long time, the Ethiopian Church actually received its head bishops, the archbishops, or abunas, from the Coptic Patriarchate in Alexandria.
So a kind of hierarchical dependence, historically speaking.
For centuries, yes. But eventually, the Ethiopian Church gained its full independence.
And the term the sources use for that self-governing status is?
Autocephaly.
Right, autocephaly. And the definition provided is basically a self-governing church whose leader doesn't report to any higher-ranking bishop elsewhere.
Precisely. It signifies full independence.
And do the documents give a date for when the Ethiopian Church achieved this?
They do. They specify 1959.
1959, so relatively recent in the grand scheme of its long history.
Compared to its origins, yes, but it was a crucial step, marking its full administrative independence after centuries of that Coptic connection.
Sort of coming into its own administratively while still being part of that Oriental Orthodox tradition.
Exactly. Now, beyond the history and the theology, the sources also give us some glimpses into the church's traditions and practices. What stands out there?
Well, one thing mentioned is the liturgical language.
Ah, yes, yes. The sources describe it as an ancient South Semitic language.
Still used today?
It remains significant liturgically, yes. But the documents also note that Amharic and other local languages are increasingly used as well.
It's amazing they've preserved such an ancient language for worship. The sources also highlight monasticism.
Yes, a very strong tradition of monasticism. It's presented as a really significant part of the church's life and spirituality.
And monasticism is defined here as like a life devoted to spiritual work, often in communities.
Right, like monasteries, convents, a life set apart for religious devotion.
Okay. And are there specific figures linked to spreading monasticism in Ethiopia, according to this material?
Yes, the 9 saints. They get a specific mention.
The 9 saints. And who were they?
Traditionally, they're believed to have been monks who arrived maybe from the Byzantine Empire, somewhere around the late 5th or early 6th century CE.
And their impact wasn't just starting monasteries.
No, it was broader. The materials credit them not only with spreading monasticism throughout Ethiopia, but also with the hugely important work of translating religious texts into Ge'ez.
Translating into Ge'ez. That would have been foundational, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Creating the basis for the church's own scriptures and liturgy in the local ancient language. A massive contribution.
Makes sense. The sources also touch briefly on the visual elements, art and such.
They mention the significant role of icons, murals, religious art, suggesting it's quite central to church life and worship.
And unique practices, too.
Yeah, they note unique liturgical practices, and even that the church follows its own distinct calendar.
Its own calendar. Wow. Okay, so if we pull all these threads together just from these documents, we've got the ancient origins, being part of the Oriental Orthodox group defined by that Miaphysite Tewahedo theology after Chalcedon.
Right.
It's deep history intertwined with Ethiopia itself since King Izana, the long relationship with the Coptic Church leading to autocephaly in 59.
And then these rich traditions, the Ge'ez liturgy, strong monasticism, thanks in part to the 9 saints, the art, the unique calendar.
It really paints a picture, based only on these sources, of a church with a very, very distinct identity.
It really does. The documents clearly show how it's been shaped by its specific history, its particular theological path, and its deep roots within Ethiopian culture. You really need to grasp these specific points from the sources to understand what makes this church what it is.
Yeah, it's clear these documents really emphasize how ancient traditions and very specific historical and theological moments have forged this unique path. This deep dive certainly helps bring those key elements into focus from the material provided.
It's quite a story of endurance, isn't it? And the lasting impact of those early decisions.
Definitely. So reflecting on everything we've just unpacked from these sources, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How does a single theological decision made at a council over 1,500 years ago continue to shape the identity, the practices, and even the global relationships of a major Christian church like the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church so profoundly today?